Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The wind cut across the cemetery like it carried something with it. A warning, maybe. Flags rustled. Boots crunched the gravel. Every face was still, every eye locked forward. A Navy SEAL was being buried. Reed Mallory, 36 years old. Active duty. Killed in a hunting accident, or so they said. Willa Mallory stood beside the casket, jaw clenched, eyes dry. Everyone around her looked broken, devastated. She just looked angry. Her brother was supposed to survive anything. He made it through hell overseas, only to die during a weekend trip in Idaho? No. Marla, Reed's wife, wore black, perfectly pressed, her hair in place. Her makeup didn't even smudge when the folded flag was handed to her. She took it with a practiced nod. Not even a flinch. No tears. Something inside Willa twisted. The gun salute went off. People jumped. Marla didn't. Willa's mind raced. Reed had sent her a voicemail a few days before he died. She hadn't listened to it yet. Couldn't. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she didn't want to hear him say goodbye before she even knew he was gone. Now she wished she had. As the final taps note rang out, a man in uniform handed Marla the flag and leaned in to whisper something. Willa noticed the way Marla barely nodded. Cold. Unbothered. That's when she knew. This wasn't grief. This was a performance. She stared at her brother's coffin, heart pounding, rage rising beneath the surface. And as the last of the mourners began to leave, she whispered to herself, "No way in hell this was just a hunting accident." Then she turned and looked back at Marla. What kind of wife doesn't cry at her husband's funeral? Wait, I need to tell you something important. Have you ever realized that you keep watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet? This video has reached this point, which means you're enjoying it. So why not subscribe? I have a big goal for 1,000 subscribers, and you can help me reach it. Think about it. If you don't subscribe now, you might miss my next big video. This is the moment. Hit that subscribe button now. Do it now. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss out. I know you'll do it. And when we hit 4,000 subscribers, I have a special surprise for you. Now let's continue story. It was nearly midnight when Willa stepped into Reed's old garage, the one place that hadn't been cleaned out by the military or Marla. Dust clung to every tool, every shelf. But his gear, his SEAL gear, was untouched. It sat in the same black trunk he'd used since BUD/S training. She unlatched it slowly. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in months. Inside, tactical vests, desert sand uniforms, a worn American flag patch, dog tags, and a small flash drive taped under the lid. Her breath caught. A message? She grabbed her laptop, hands trembling, and plugged the drive in. One file. Password protected. She didn't know the code. But Reed wasn't the type to use random numbers. She typed SEAL Team 7. Nothing. She tried again. Willa 1987, the year she was born. Access granted. One video file popped up. Timestamp. 2 weeks before his death. She hit play. Reed's face appeared, sweaty, bruised, but sharp-eyed. He looked like he hadn't slept. He stared into the camera and spoke quietly. If you're watching this, something's gone wrong. And if I'm dead, it wasn't an accident. Willa's spine went cold. I've been tracking something. Someone. I don't know how deep it goes yet, but I've got suspicions. And if I'm right, Marla's not just cheating. She's planning something. Silence. He looked down, swallowed hard. If anything happens to me, don't go to the cops. Don't trust the sheriff. Go dark. And finish what I started. The screen went black. Willa sat frozen. Her brother had known. He'd seen it coming. And now it was her turn to finish what he started. But what exactly had Reed uncovered before they got to him? The hunting cabin stood empty, silent, and soaked in early morning fog. Willa stood at the threshold, staring at the exact spot where Reed's body was found, according to the sheriff's report. Her boots crunched over broken twigs and gravel as she stepped inside. Everything about this place felt wrong. The crime scene photos she'd pulled from the sheriff's digital archives, without permission, showed Reed lying with the rifle half under him, shot through the chest. The angle didn't make sense. Reed wouldn't be that sloppy, not a SEAL. He didn't even go hunting often. Why would he be out here alone? She looked around. Bullet holes in the wall. A shattered bottle in the corner. Signs of a struggle, none of which were in the official report. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text. You're looking in the wrong places. She backed up fast, scanning the tree line outside. No one. Heart pounding. She ducked out of the cabin and ran behind it, pulling her pistol. Her hands were steady, but her breathing wasn't. Whoever sent that text, they were watching her. But she wasn't done. Back inside, she dug around the floorboards, searching every inch. Behind an old stove, she found a scrap of paper, burned edges, partially torn, but readable. If they ask, it was a misfire. He had been drinking. He went alone. Signed with the initials, B.D. Brockton. She'd heard the name once, whispered at Reed and Marla's anniversary party by someone drunk. She remembered the tone, disgust. Now she had proof of a lie. And a name. Willa stood slowly, gripping the note. Did Brock Denton kill her brother? Or was he just one piece of something worse? Willa sat in her car with the heater blasting and the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just poked something alive, something that didn't want to be disturbed. Her hands trembled as she stared at the torn note in her lap. If they ask, it was a misfire. That word was stuck with her. Past tense. Final. Like Reed's life had been boiled down to a sentence someone rehearsed. What else was planned? She pulled into her motel and locked every deadbolt behind her. She dropped her backpack and opened Reed's old notebook, one he used during deployments. Most of it was tactical notes, coordinates, boring stuff. But toward the back, one page stood out. If something happens, don't believe what they say. It was never an accident. It was a setup. Watch Marla. Trust no one. There it was again, Reed had already accepted something. That they were coming for him. That his death was part of a plan. She stared at the ceiling. Her pulse thudded in her ears. How long had he known? Why didn't he call her? No, she knew the answer. He wanted to protect her. But now she was in. Fully. And she wasn't walking away. Her burner phone buzzed. Unknown number? Still chasing ghosts? Little sister? You don't know half of it. Her stomach dropped. She texted back one word. Who? No reply. Her eyes drifted back to Reed's note. Watch Marla. She had been avoiding that step. But now? It was time to see what the grieving widow was hiding. Willa parked 2 blocks away from Reed and Marla's house. It still felt weird calling it just hers now. She used to spend holidays here. Reed would grill. Marla would drink too much wine and laugh too loud. But now? It was a stranger's house. A lie wrapped in brick. No cameras. No lights. No barking dog, she whispered, eyes scanning the windows. Too clean. She crept through the side yard, boots sinking into the muddy grass. Found the spare key still hidden behind the same loose brick. Marla never was careful. She slipped inside. Dark. Quiet. No sign of anyone home. She moved fast. Drawers, closets, file cabinets. Most of it was boring. Tax records, takeout menus, real estate papers. But then she opened a thin manila envelope tucked into the back of Marla's desk. Inside, 2 burner phones. One still had power. Willa's thumb hovered over the screen. The last message thread was open. Brock Denton, we wait till after the funeral. Then disappear. Marla, we should have done it months ago. Willa's jaw clenched. Rage threatened to push her over the edge, but she kept it together. No emotion. Not yet. A car pulled up outside. Headlights flashed across the living room. Marla was home. Willa shut the drawer, grabbed the burner phone, and slipped into the laundry room. She listened. Footsteps. The jingle of keys. A soft laugh. But she was alone? Then a male voice. You sure no one's watching us? Brock. He was in the house. Willa backed up slowly, heart thudding like a war drum. She couldn't blow this. Not yet. But she had what she needed. The message. The voice. The proof. There was no accident, and there was no turning back now. The sheriff's office smelled like burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant. Willa sat across from Sheriff Rusk, watching him lean back in his creaky chair like he had all the time in the world. He didn't. "You're chasing smoke, Willa," he said, waving off her concerns. "It was an accident. A misfire. These things happen." She slid the printed message across the desk, Brock and Marla's texts. His eyebrows twitched, just for a second. "Where'd you get this?" he asked flatly. "Doesn't matter. That's conspiracy to commit murder, Sheriff." He sighed, tapped his pen, then locked eyes with her. "You know your brother drank, right? Couldn't sleep without it. Took meds too. What's to say he didn't mess up?" She leaned in. "He was a SEAL, trained to survive chaos. You think he just tripped and shot himself? That what you're going with?" His tone dropped. "Sometimes people see what they want to see, and sometimes they ignore what they're paid to ignore," she shot back. Silence. He stood, walked to the file cabinet, and pulled out the official autopsy. He placed it down, but didn't open it. "Leave this alone, Willa. I'm saying that for your own good." She stared at the folder. "Why's the coroner gone, Sheriff?" He didn't answer. She stood. "Then I guess I'll find him myself." Back in her car, Willa opened the folder she'd swiped from his desk while he turned around. Inside, staged photos, angles doctored, timestamps blurred. It was a joke. Reed hadn't died by accident. He'd been erased. And now someone was trying to do the same to her. She looked in the rearview mirror. A black SUV was parked 2 cars behind her. Engine running. Windows tinted. Was she the next accident they were planning? The man in the photo was smiling. Broad shoulders, tint skin, arms slung around Reed's back like they were brothers. He wore a faded navy cap, his name barely visible on the brim, Cal Monroe. Willa had found the picture inside Reed's old rucksack, tucked in an envelope labeled his, just that word, nothing else. She hadn't seen Cal in years. Last she heard, he left the Navy and disappeared into the mountains of Wyoming. She drove 8 hours to find him. His cabin was off the grid, buried in pine trees and snow. When he opened the door, he didn't look surprised. "Willa," he said quietly, "I was wondering when you'd show." She stepped inside. No small talk. "You were his best friend. He left me this." She handed him the photo. He nodded, eyes lowering. "He told me he thought something was coming," Cal said. "Said it wasn't overseas this time, it was home." Willa's throat tightened. "Did he say who?" "Not names. Just that he was being hunted slowly. Not by enemies. By people who once knew everything about him." She pulled out her phone and showed him the texts. The burner phone. Brock's name. Cal's jaw locked. "Denton." "Yeah. I've heard that name before." Willa leaned in. "From where?" He hesitated. "Guy was military adjacent. Contract work. Not legit. Shady as hell." She froze. Reed had been hunted by someone trained, someone who knew how to make murder look like an accident. Her brother's death wasn't just betrayal. It was tactical, deliberate, personal. She stared at the photo in her hand, 2 brothers in arms frozen in time. "He knew it would be someone close, didn't he?" she asked. Cal nodded once. "He knew it would be one of his own." Marla looked in the mirror and didn't recognize her own face. Her hair was still perfect. Makeup on point. Designer robe hugging her waist. But her eyes, they looked wrong. Nervous. Hunted. She lit a cigarette and opened her bedroom window, letting the smoke drift into the cold night. Brock was in the shower. She could hear him humming like everything was fine. Like they hadn't just buried her husband 2 weeks ago. Her husband. She whispered the word like it still had weight. But it didn't. Not anymore. Reed had been distant. Complicated. Always gone. Always thinking 5 steps ahead. She'd felt invisible long before Brock showed up. But she never meant for it to go this far. Did she? Brock stepped out, towel around his waist. He leaned in and kissed her neck. "We'll be fine," he said. She turned to him. "You're sure no one saw anything? No one's asking questions?" "Babe," he smiled, "you're a widow. No one suspects the grieving wife." She tried to believe him, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Later that night, when Brock fell asleep, she checked her phone. One new message. Unknown number. You and your boyfriend look cozy. Shame about the husband. Her heart stopped. She threw the phone across the room. Outside the house, headlights flicked off. Tires rolled away slow, silent. She stared out into the dark, clutching her arms. Reed used to tell her that every operation leaves shadows behind. You don't see them until it's too late. She laughed once, bitter. Guess I should have listened. But it wasn't the shadow of her dead husband haunting her now. It was the woman who used to call her family. Willa. Willa didn't sleep that night. She sat in her motel room with every light on, phone beside her, pistol on the nightstand. The burner phone buzzed again, another text. Unknown number. You really think this ends with Brock? She didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the wall, thinking of how it all spiraled. Reed, Marla, Brock, and whoever else was involved. It wasn't just two people. This was bigger. She opened her laptop and pulled up an encrypted file Reed had saved, one she hadn't dared open yet. It required a key phrase. She tried something simple, and then there were two. Access granted. Video footage. Grainy, but clear enough. It showed Marla and Brock together, inside Reed's house, arguing. Marla, you said it would be clean. Brock, it was clean. Marla, he had a camera. What if he kept files? Brock, and if he did, we find them and her. And we end this. Her hand shook. They were talking about her. The files. The threat. The next target. Her. She backed up the video to a flash drive and shoved it into her pocket. Her voice cracked in the silence. They killed him, and now they're coming for me. Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to fall. She stood and grabbed her coat. If this was going to end, it wouldn't be in a motel room. She was going to make them feel what Reed never got the chance to. Fear, paranoia, guilt, and consequences. Willa pulled her hood over her head and stepped into the rain. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You're getting close. Closer than you should. She smiled without warmth. Good. Willa had seen betrayal before. She'd watched fellow soldiers sell each other out over money, pride, or fear. But none of it came close to this, her. Marla, the woman who sat at their family table, who smiled like she meant it, who kissed Reed's cheek and whispered, I love you, when no one was looking. Now she was a liar with blood on her hands. Willa stood outside a small diner on the edge of town, waiting. Inside, she watched Marla laugh with a friend, sip coffee, pretend the world hadn't shifted under her feet. She wasn't grieving. She was free. Willa stepped inside, slow and calm. Marla saw her, and for a split second, the mask cracked. Willa, she said, smiling like it was a reunion. I didn't know you were still in town. Yeah, Willa said, still tying up a few loose ends. Marla's smile faded. Her friend excused herself quickly. Reed trusted you, Willa said, keeping her voice low. Marla's eyes darted. Don't start. He loved you, Willa continued. And you gave him up for a man who's going to bury you next. Marla stood, voice shaking. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, Willa said, sliding the burner phone across the table. And you should be scared. Marla didn't touch it. She couldn't. Willa leaned in close. You look good in black. You'll be wearing it again soon. Then she turned and walked out, not looking back. Her brother gave his heart to the wrong woman. Now Willa would rip hers out in return. Brock Denton had been many things, welder, contractor, bartender, drifter. But beneath all that, he was a predator. He sat alone at a roadside bar, flipping through fake IDs on his burner phone. The name Brock Denton had worked for a while. Not anymore. Too many questions. Too many whispers. And now? That girl, Reed's sister, she was getting too close. He sipped his beer, scanning the room. Small town. Weak law. Still, he felt like something was tightening around him. He didn't like it. A stranger slid into the booth across from him. Tall, leather jacket, clean cut. Name's Garrett, he said. I work for people who want this whole mess gone. Brock didn't answer. Garrett slid a folded photo across the table. Willa, outside Marla's house. She's a problem, he said. She keeps going, you go down. Or worse. Brock nodded slowly. What are you suggesting? Simple, Garrett said. Make her disappear. Quietly. Or you're the one we clean up. Brock stared at the photo. He hated Reed. Hated what he represented. Strength, control, pride. Willa had that same fire. Same stare. He wouldn't just take her out. He'd enjoy it. It's funny how people think they want the truth until they get it. Willa sat in the dark, the only light coming from the screen in front of her. On it played one of Reed's final videos, one she hadn't dared watch until now. His voice came through the static. Calm. Heavy. If you're seeing this, I was right. He paused. They wanted me gone. And now they're coming for you too, Willa. But you've always been the fighter. The one who finishes what others are too afraid to start. She pressed pause. Her throat burned. Not from fear, from everything building up inside her that never got said. She stood up, faced the camera she'd set up for her own recording. And this time, she spoke. To the people watching this, you've seen the fake stories before. Cheaters. Killers. Revenge plots. But this isn't a story. She stepped closer. This is real. Reed Mallory was a Navy SEAL. He gave everything. And he was betrayed. By his wife. By a coward. And by a system that protects the wrong people. A beat. So let me ask you something. Yeah, you. Watching this. She pointed at the lens. What city are you in right now? Huh? Dallas? Philly? Portland? Somewhere quiet where you think stuff like this doesn't happen. She leaned in. Guess what? It does. And next time, it might be your brother. Your sister. Your name on the coffin. A pause. She let the silence do its work. Watch closely. She ended the recording. Because what came next wasn't for the camera. The storage unit smelled like dust and regret. Willa's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she stepped inside the rustic garage Reed had rented under a fake name. She knew it was his. The paperwork matched a burner ID she found in his encrypted notes. In the back corner, sealed in a green military footlocker, was what she came for. Inside, notebooks, flash drives, and a labeled envelope. One word on the front, him. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy, zoomed in, time-stamped. Brock, with Marla, kissing, meeting in motels, handing off cash. But it was the last photo that made Willa freeze. Brock wasn't alone. He was sitting across from someone in a dark suit, no face visible, just a wristwatch and a set of folders on the table. Reed had circled the man's hand. Written underneath, he's not just a side piece. He's working for him. There was more to this. Brock wasn't just a jealous boyfriend with a bad temper. He was being paid. Used. Willa stared at the photos and whispered, Reed, you were digging into something deeper than I realized. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. He knew too much. Just like you do now. She looked up, heart pounding. The door to the unit was sliding shut. Someone was out there. She grabbed the files and ducked behind a crate, gun drawn. A bootstep. Then silence. Whoever he was, the one behind Brock, behind all of it, he wasn't just watching anymore. He was making his move. Brock paced the motel room like a caged animal. What do you mean she found the storage unit? He hissed into the burner phone. You told me that location was dead. Garrett's voice came through the line, calm and clipped. She's smarter than you gave her credit for. No, Brock snapped. She's desperate. There's a difference. He stopped, stared at himself in the cracked bathroom mirror. Behind him, Marla sat on the bed, clutching her purse like it was a life raft. I told you, she said softly. We should have left the night of the funeral. Brock turned, furious. We leave now, they'll follow us. She's already unraveling everything. Marla stood. Then fix it. Make her go away. Like you did to Reed. He froze. That was the first time she'd said it out loud. I didn't pull the trigger, he muttered. No, she said. But you were the reason it happened. The silence between them stretched until Brock spoke again. We disappear tonight. Pack up. No phones. No trace. Marla didn't move. You said we'd be free once he was gone, she whispered. But he's gone. And I've never felt more trapped. A knock at the door. Brock pulled his gun and crept forward. Another knock. Then an envelope slid under the door. He opened it. Inside, a photo of Reed's body and a note in red marker. "You're next." He looked up slowly. Out the peephole. No one. Just a feeling that everything they built was burning down. And someone was watching it happen. Someone who wouldn't stop until they were gone, too. Night had a weight to it now. Every sound made Willa's skin crawl. Every creak. Every gust of wind. Every whisper that wasn't there. She sat alone in her motel room, piecing together the files from Reed's stash. Surveillance. Names. Phone numbers. Conversations secretly recorded. He'd been preparing for something, maybe even expecting to die. But one name kept coming up. Louis Gentry. Retired military. Private security. Operated in legal gray zones. And he wore a gold watch, like the one in the photo. He was the shadow behind Brock. She printed the photo, circled the watch, and slid it into her pocket. Then she turned out the lights. Waited. And at exactly 2:14 a.m., someone knocked on her door. She didn't move. A shadow shifted under the crack of the door. Heavy boots. Slow pacing. Another knock. Louder. She pulled her pistol, thumbed the safety off, and stood by the door. Then silence. Minutes passed. She opened the door fast, gun aimed. Nothing. No one in the hall. But taped to the outside of her door, a single photo. Her. Sleeping. From inside the room. She staggered back, locking the door with shaking hands. Whoever was behind this didn't just want her gone. They wanted her to feel hunted. Afraid. And if they thought fear would stop her, they didn't know Reed's sister at all. The drive to the mountains felt endless. Willa had memorized the GPS coordinates from Reed's folder. No address. Just numbers scrawled next to the name. Gentry. She knew what she was walking into. Or at least, she thought she did. When she reached the cabin, she killed the engine and let silence take over. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. The kind that only came before something dangerous. She stepped up to the door and knocked once. The man who answered looked exactly like the surveillance photo, older, hard face, gold watch on his left wrist. He didn't look surprised. "Willa Mallory," he said flatly. "I was wondering when you'd show." "I've got questions," she said, eyes locked on him. "I bet you do," he replied, stepping aside. "You've got 5 minutes. And I don't repeat myself." The inside of his cabin was clean. Too clean. Like it was staged. Willa didn't sit. "What was your connection to Brock Denton?" He raised an eyebrow. "Contractor. Temporary muscle. He wanted out. Thought killing a SEAL would be his ticket." Her fists clenched. "So you admit it?" He shook his head. "I didn't order it. I didn't stop it. And that's where guilt lives." She stared at him. "Why Reed?" He leaned forward. "Because your brother was close to exposing something we didn't want out. Government ops. Missing funds. Names that don't belong in daylight. And you covered it up?" "I let it happen." "That's different." "No," she said, stepping back, voice trembling. "It's not." As she left, he called after her. "You should walk away, Willa. There are secrets in this world that'll bury you deeper than your brother." She didn't stop walking. She was done being afraid of secrets. Marla's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped the bathroom sink and stared at herself. Her makeup was flawless, but the woman in the mirror looked sick. Exhausted. Haunted. Another message had arrived that morning. No words. Just a picture. Reed's military dog tags, half buried in dirt, like a grave waiting to be filled. She ran the sink, splashed cold water on her face, then stared at her phone. No missed calls. No new texts. No help. Downstairs, Brock paced like a man ready to implode. He was snapping, more paranoid every hour. "Tell me again what she knows," he barked. "I don't know." Marla yelled. "She has something. Maybe a video. Maybe photos. But she's getting closer." He slammed a fist into the wall. "Then we end it. Now." Marla swallowed hard. "I thought we already did." He looked at her like she was a stranger. "Reed was easy. He trusted you. Willa? She's not wired like him." Marla sat down slowly. "We were supposed to have a new life." Brock scoffed. "You're living in a motel. This is your new life." She looked away. For the first time since Reed's death, she felt the truth sink into her skin. She wasn't in control. She never had been. Reed had died with his honor intact. She was just trying to survive. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Pressure makes diamonds. Or corpses. She dropped it, chest tightening. Outside, the clouds darkened. Thunder echoed. And for the first time, Marla realized she might not survive this. The cabin exploded at 2:07 a.m. The blast lit the night sky like a flare, orange and violet. By the time Willa reached the ridge above it, flames were already clawing through the roof. The air reeked of gasoline. She dropped to one knee, trying to process what she was seeing. That cabin was supposed to be her safe house. Now it was ash. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. No more hiding. She should have known. The moment she started putting pieces together, someone would come for her. Not just Brock. Not just Gentry. Someone higher. Willa backed away, eyes scanning the woods. No movement. No sound. Whoever set the fire was already gone. But the message was clear. They didn't want her to stop. They wanted her scared. Dead. She checked her backpack. The flash drives, photos, Reed's final video, all with her. She learned from Reed. Never keep everything in one place. Still, the loss stung. That cabin was more than walls. It was her brother's last gift. His final layer of protection. Now it was gone. Burned out of existence. Just like they tried to do to him. She looked out at the fire, glowing in the dark, a hell-lit warning. Then she whispered to herself, "You want a war?" She loaded a fresh mag into her pistol. "Then I'll bring you one." Willa didn't feel fear anymore. Just purpose. She stood over her motel bed. Every piece of evidence spread out. Hard drives, printed photos, digital backups, copies hidden in 3 other locations. She had enough to bury Brock and Marla, but this wasn't about exposure. This was about consequences. Reed had lived by one rule: control the op, or don't run it at all. And right now, Willow was done reacting. She was done hiding. She was going to end this. She placed a call. A familiar voice answered. "Willa." "Hey, Gwen," she said quietly. "You still have contacts at the FBI field office in Boise? I thought you wanted this off the books." "I did," Willa replied. "Now I want it on the news." She sent over files, untraceable. Photos, location data, cash transfers, hidden identities. Gwen promised to review everything, but Willa knew it wouldn't be fast enough. So she started her own op. Step 1. Flush Brock out. She hacked Marla's personal email, sent an anonymous message. "The police know everything. Brock's cutting a deal." Then she waited. 2 hours later, Marla left the motel alone. Nervous. Distracted. And Brock? He panicked. Called 3 different burners. Changed motels. Bought a new SIM card. He was unraveling. Exactly like Willa wanted. She'd taken the control back. And now? She was going to press it. Hard. The confessional was old. Would crack from years of whispered sins. But Marla wasn't here for redemption. She was here because she had no one else left. The priest slid the small divider open. "Whenever you're ready." She hesitated. I think I helped kill my husband." Silence. "I didn't pull the trigger," she continued. "But I didn't stop it either. I didn't warn him. I saw the signs. I just wanted out." Still, the priest said nothing. Marla wiped her eyes. "He wasn't a bad man. Just distant. He stopped seeing me. And then Brock. He made me feel alive again. But now I feel like I'm falling apart." She clutched her stomach like something inside was breaking. "I'm scared. I think someone's watching me. I see things. Hear things that aren't there. I don't know if I'm being followed or if I'm losing my mind." Then, finally, the voice on the other side spoke. But it wasn't the priest. It was a woman's voice. Calm. Sharp. "You're not losing your mind, Marla. You're being watched." Marla's body froze. The woman continued. "You murdered a Navy SEAL. You think hell is what waits for you? You haven't even met me yet." Marla scrambled out of the booth, heart racing. No one in the church. No priest at the front. Just a speaker, still echoing one final whisper. "He died with honor. You'll die in fear." Brock should have known better. He was a tactician, trained in misdirection. But something about this felt wrong. Too quiet. Too smooth. The message he'd received was simple. Meet at 8 p.m. at the old rail yard. Come alone. Proof for immunity awaits. Of course he didn't believe it, but he went anyway, because deep down, Brock knew the walls were closing in. He pulled into the yard and killed the engine. Darkness swallowed the area. No lights, no people, just silence. He stepped out, pistol under his jacket, ears tuned for movement. Then he heard it. A click, followed by a voice over the loudspeaker. Brock Denton, you are not a ghost. You are not untouchable. You're just next. He spun around. Show yourself. A spotlight kicked on, aimed straight at his chest. Then another. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Hood up. Confident. Willa. Brock laughed once, low and bitter. You came alone? No, she said. I brought your lies. She hit a button on a remote. A projector on the side of the building lit up, playing the motel tapes, the confession, the surveillance of Reed's final days. Everything you did, everything you said, it's all here. He stepped forward. You really think anyone cares? You think they'll arrest me? She smirked. No, Brock. I'm not here for justice. She raised her pistol. I'm here for my brother. Brock didn't flinch when Willa raised the gun. That scared her more than if he had. You're not going to pull that trigger, he said, voice steady. You don't have it in you. Willa didn't blink. I used to think that too. The air hung thick between them. The projector behind her still played, audio looping Brock's voice, Marla's voice, words soaked in guilt and blood. I came here to make a deal, Brock said, lifting his hands slowly. Not fight. You think you have leverage? She snapped. I have names, he said. Real names. You think I'm the top of this? I'm not. I'm a soldier. Same as Reed. Just on the other side. She didn't lower the gun, but she listened. You kill me, Brock said. You get revenge. Fine. But you don't get answers. You don't find out why Reed really died. You don't expose the people paying for this. The ones who keep it buried. He was sweating now, not because of fear, but urgency. They're still out there. And they're watching. You kill me? They bury the truth for good. Willa's hand trembled. So talk. I want immunity. I want out. You don't get out, she said coldly. Not after what you did. Then she lowered the gun. Just a little. I'll give you one shot. One name. If it checks out, maybe I don't put a bullet in your spine tonight. Brock exhaled. Slowly. Louis Gentry was a middleman. But the money? The orders? They came from someone else. He looked up. Senator Harlan Reeves. Willa felt her blood go cold. This wasn't just a hit. This was political. Federal. Tied to power. And suddenly, killing Brock wasn't enough. The FBI office buzzed with noise. Printers, keyboards, low conversations. Gwen had only minutes before someone checked her terminal. She slipped the flash drive Willa had mailed her into the back port and opened the files. Her eyes widened. Not just photos, documents. Bank transfers from black budget accounts. Security clearance levels. Surveillance footage. Audio recordings of names being dropped, meetings being arranged. Brock. Gentry. And now, Senator Reeves. It was too big. Too real. She copied everything, encrypted it, and sent it to one backup server. Then another. Across the country, Willa sat in her car outside a gas station, burner phone clutched in her lap. The message came in. Files received. This is way bigger than you thought. Keep your head down. Trust no one. She already didn't. Back at the motel, she pulled open the floorboard she'd carved out herself. Another backup drive. Another pistol. Another license. She wasn't Willa anymore. Not to them. She was a threat. And now that the truth was moving, so would they. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You want to play with fire? You're not fireproof. She stared out the window, gripping the wheel. I don't need to be, she whispered. I just need to burn everything down before they find me. She turned the key in the ignition. Destination, D.C. Because evidence wasn't enough anymore. It was time for confrontation. Marla had checked out of 5 motels in 3 days. She changed phones twice. Used cash only. Stopped calling Brock. But no matter how far she ran, the feeling followed, eyes. Always watching. She sat in a grimy hotel bathroom in Kentucky, sink leaking, walls stained. Her hands gripped the counter as she whispered to herself, "You didn't kill him. You didn't pull the trigger." But the truth wouldn't let go. You let it happen. You chose silence. A floorboard creaked outside. She froze. Pistol in hand, she stepped into the room. Nothing. Then, knock, knock. She spun toward the door. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. "Who is it?" she snapped. No answer. She checked the peephole. Nothing but dark. She opened the door anyway. An envelope sat on the ground. She picked it up with shaking hands. Inside was a photo. Willa. In D.C. outside the Capitol building. On the back, one word. Closer. Marla sank to the floor. She'd wanted Reed gone so she could have her freedom. Her peace. But freedom didn't come after betrayal. Only shadows. And those shadows were moving closer. Washington, D.C. looked polished on the outside. But underneath, it rotted just like anywhere else. Willa sat at a cafe across from the Capitol, dark sunglasses on, a manila folder resting in her lap. Inside were the files Brock had given up, now backed by the evidence Gwen had verified. It was enough to burn careers. Maybe even take down a senator. But not without a fight. Her phone buzzed. "Gwen, Reeves is protected. You're not. If you push this, you better be ready to lose everything." She was. Because her brother already had. Willa looked across the plaza at the man in the expensive suit stepping out of a black car. Senator Harlan Reeves. Clean-cut. Smiling. Taking handshakes from people who didn't know they were shaking hands with the killer's boss. She recognized his watch immediately, the same one in Reed's photo. She stood, started walking toward him. 2 men in suits noticed. Started tracking her. She kept moving. Then she stopped. Because she knew if she went further, she wouldn't get a second shot. Not yet. She turned and walked the other way, slipping the folder into a courier's hand with a whispered name. Gwen Turner. FBI. Behind her, one of the suited men spoke into his cuff. They were watching. They'd always been watching. But now they knew she knew. And the truth was tied to them. And she was about to start pulling. Brock hadn't slept in 48 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, Reed was there. Not the real Reed, but a ghost version. Face bloodied, chest torn open, staring through him. "You really thought you were smarter than me?" the ghost would whisper. And Brock would wake up choking on air. He sat in his motel room, blinds drawn, gun on the table, a half bottle of whiskey gone. The paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone was following him. He saw the same red sedan 3 times. A man in a coat that didn't fit the weather. Calls that came with no voice on the other end. He didn't know if it was Willa or someone worse. He checked the locks again. Then he saw the note under the door. No name. Just a sentence. "You die tomorrow at sunrise." He flipped every piece of furniture in the room, tore out the drawers, checked the vents, nothing. No cameras. No listening devices. But someone had been in. That meant he wasn't just being watched. He was being hunted. By a ghost. And the closer Willa got to the truth, the more Brock felt the walls closing in. He picked up the gun and whispered to himself, "You won't catch me alive." But in the back of his mind, another voice whispered louder, "You already are." Willa sat alone in a church, the same one where Marla had broken down in the confessional. Now it was her turn. She didn't speak. Not out loud. She just sat, fist clenched, watching the light spill through the stained glass windows. Her body was calm. Her mind was war. For weeks, she'd been fighting in the dark, alone, hunted, hated. But for the first time, there was silence. And in that silence, she made her decision. This wouldn't end in court. Not in headlines. Not with another folder gathering dust on some politician's desk. This would end with the same weight it started with. Blood. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, hand already reaching for her weapon. It was Gwen. Willa didn't move. Gwen sat beside her, handed her a folder. Full report. Reeves. Gentry. Brock. "There's enough here to destroy all of them." And Willa asked, "They know we have it. They'll kill to bury it." Willa nodded. "Then let's bury them first." She stood and walked out of the church. Outside, the sun had started to rise. But Willa didn't feel peace. She felt war. And silence was about to be replaced with fire. They thought she'd stay small. They thought grief would break her. But Willa wasn't grieving anymore. She was building something. From a coffee shop across the street from Senator Reeves' downtown office, she uploaded 3 identical data packages to 3 different journalists. Inside, the proof. Transactions. Phone recordings. A signed Black Ops directive with Reeves' name in the corner. This was more than murder. It was treason, laundered through handshakes and sealed files. She sent one last message: release if I disappear. Across town, Gwen waited in an unmarked car, scanning the office through a pair of binoculars. He's sweating, she said through the comm. Security detail just doubled. He knows something's coming. He's right, Willa replied, sliding her pistol into the back of her waistband. Then she turned to the man sitting across from her. Cal Monroe, Reed's old SEAL brother, back from hiding. You sure about this? He asked. I don't want revenge, Willa said. I want balance. He nodded. Balance gets messy. She smiled. Then I hope they brought gloves. Outside, thunder rolled low over D.C. And across every screen that mattered, the countdown had already begun. Willa had leverage now, and she wasn't letting go. Marla stood in front of the mirror again. Same face, same eyes, same perfect skin. But something behind it had broken. She tried to wear the mask, the grieving widow, the innocent caught in the storm. She'd worn it well at first. But now it cracked. She barely left the motel room. Every sound made her jump. Every knock made her flinch. She'd betrayed her husband. And worse, she'd trusted a man who used her like a shield. Brock was missing, gone, and no one was coming to save her. She checked her email, again. Still nothing. No money. No escape route. Just silence. Then her burner phone buzzed. New message. Nice mask. Let's see what's underneath. Attached was a photo. Her. In the shower. Taken from inside the bathroom. She dropped the phone, backed into the wall, breath caught in her throat. No more pretending. No more safety. No more lies to wear like armor. The mask was off. And what was left behind was just fear. Brock didn't even fight when the car doors opened and 4 men in suits dragged him out of the back seat. He hit the floor hard, dirt in his mouth, gun at his neck. He knew what this was. Clean up. The kind of silence only real power could order. He rolled onto his back, stared up at the man in the coat. Expensive. Pressed. No face he recognized, just calm authority. You made a mess, the man said. Brock laughed through blood. Takes one to know one. The man didn't flinch. You've been sloppy since day one. That's the problem with people like you. You think power is who holds the gun. He knelt beside him. Power is who decides who walks away. Brock swallowed. You can kill me. Doesn't change anything. The girl's still coming. The man raised an eyebrow. We know. And she's next. Then he stood, gave the signal. But before the trigger was pulled, a voice rang out from the trees. Step away from him. Flashlight beams cut through the dark. Tactical gear. Trained hands. Cal, Willa, Gwen. The man in the coat turned slowly. And for the first time, looked surprised. Thought you were smarter than that. Willa said, pistol raised. No, he said. Just better backed. Not tonight. Then she stepped forward. Tonight, you collapse. Willa hadn't slept in almost 2 days. But adrenaline kept her sharp. From the safe house in Virginia, she stared at the wall of screens in front of her, live feeds from every hidden camera she and Cal had planted over the last month. Offices, garages, hotel lobbies, storage units, private estates. It was all here now. The final web. And at the center? Senator Reeves. He was moving money again, big amounts. Offshore accounts. Disappearing fast. He knew. He'd seen the leak. He was trying to vanish before the blast reached him. Too late. Got him, Gwen said from across the room. Flight booked. Private jet. Leaves in 6 hours. Where's he headed? Willa asked. Zurich. Then gone. Willa stood. Not if we beat him there. They had footage of Gentry receiving payments, phone records linking him to Brock, surveillance of secret meetings and classified military facilities. Willa moved to the console, hit one button. The entire network of footage uploaded live to 3 secure media outlets. This wasn't just evidence anymore. This was exposure. The world was about to see what Reed had died for, and what his sister refused to let stay buried. She looked at the screen one last time, paused it on the image of Reeves shaking hands with Gentry in a parking garage. "Smile," she muttered. "You're on camera." Reeves slammed the door behind him, the panic finally showing on his face. His safe house was buried in a gated property, surrounded by ex-military security. Reinforced doors. Clean exits. No traceable comms. And yet, somehow, he felt caged. Confined. Everything was spinning out. He'd survived years of secrets, covert ops, black budgets, media leaks, all with a calm, untouchable confidence. But not this. Not her. Willa Mallory was a ghost with teeth. A woman with nothing left to lose. And now she'd turned the spotlight on him, a senator with nowhere to run. He paced the room, watching the news feeds roll in on every screen. Willa Mallory exposes murder conspiracy, senator connected to Navy SEAL cover-up. His phone rang. One of his last insiders. "Too late," the voice said. "They're coming for you." He looked out the window. Flashlights. Shadows. Not media. Her. He reached for his pistol, checked the mag, loaded a round. He wouldn't be taken alive. But as he turned, the door opened. Willa stood there, eyes locked on his. "I wouldn't do that," she said, gun already aimed. He hesitated, then slowly put the weapon down. For the first time in his life, Reeves knew what it felt like to be the target, to be confined by the truth. Marla was gone. No trace. No final call. Just a credit card charge at a train station and a phone dumped in a trash bin near Tennessee. Kel found the footage later, security cam showing her boarding alone. No bags. No goodbye. Just escape. She knew the net was closing, Gwen said. She ran before it hit her doorstep. Willa stared at the screen, jaw tight. She betrayed Reed. Lied to the cops. Helped cover up the murder. And now she walks away. She won't get far, Kel said. Truth follows you, even when nobody else does. Willa nodded, but it didn't feel like enough. Brock was in custody. Reeves was facing charges. Gentry had disappeared. But Marla? She would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. And Willa would make sure of it. She walked outside, the night quiet now. The storm had passed, the chaos fading. But her heart still throbbed with everything that had been lost and everything that still needed justice. Phil joined her. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "Not yet." "What's left?" She stared out into the dark, as if waiting for a ghost to answer. "The part that comes after betrayal," she said softly. "The part where you finally figure out who you are." The courtroom was packed. Press. Federal agents. Victims' families. Veterans who'd served with Reed. Gwen. Cal. Even faces Willa didn't recognize, all of them watching. But Senator Harlan Reeves? He looked small for the first time. Thin. Pale. Tired. Powerless. He took the stand after 3 hours of testimony. The judge barely looked up. The air in the room was heavy, not just with law, but with weight. History. Blood. The prosecutor spoke softly. "You've been given a chance to speak." Reeves nodded once, then cleared his throat. "I never gave the order," he said. "But I didn't stop it. No apology. No guilt. Just a man trying to survive with words. I was told Reed Mallory was a threat to national interests, that his investigation could compromise critical programs." He looked at Willa. "I didn't want anyone to die, but I didn't stop them either." Willa didn't blink. She just stared. "You helped bury a soldier," the prosecutor said, "and you stood on that grave." Silence. Then Reeves finally said it. "I was wrong." It was quiet. No one clapped. No one cried. Because everyone knew it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Willa stood and walked out without a word. Confessions don't erase betrayal. They only prove it happened. The warehouse was cold. Empty. Echoed like a tomb. Willa waited inside, gun holstered, jacket zipped high. She'd asked for this meeting. Set it up through one of Brock's old contacts. She didn't know who would show. She just knew someone would. And when the door creaked open, she didn't flinch. Louis Gentry stepped inside. Alone. He looked older, weathered, but calm. Always calm. "You're hard to kill," he said. Willa didn't smile. "I learned from the best." Gentry glanced around. "No cameras this time? Just you, me, and the truth." He nodded. "Then say it." "You knew," she said. "You had every chance to stop it. Reed trusted you. I did what I was ordered to do. And that's what cowards say." A beat of silence. Then Gentry stepped closer. "What now? You shoot me?" "No," Willa said. "That's too clean." She pulled out a flash drive and tossed it to his feet. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything. Your accounts. Your contacts. Your trail." She stepped closer. "You're going to disappear. No money. No protection. Nothing. And if I don't, then I finish what Reed started. Publicly. Loudly. And the next time you run, you'll wish I had just pulled the trigger." Gentry stared at her, then nodded once. "You're your brother's sister." "No," she said, walking away. "I'm my own weapon now." 3 weeks later, the world had changed. The hearings were broadcast. Indictments dropped. Political fallout scattered like broken glass. Names Willa had never heard before were suddenly household conversations. Some ran. Some flipped. A few took the coward's way out. Reeves was sentenced. Brock too. And Gentry? Gone. Vanished. Exactly how she'd planned. But justice? That wasn't a headline. Justice was quieter than she thought it'd be. It came in the form of silence. Real silence. No phones buzzing. No men in suits watching her. No whispers in dark corners. Just stillness. She stood at Reed's grave, wind rustling the grass around her. "I did it," she whispered. "Not the way you would have. But I did it." She knelt down, brushed her fingers over his name carved in stone. "You were always the warrior," she said. "I just became something else." A pause. "I think you'd be proud of that." Behind her, Cal waited by the car. She stood, exhaled slow, then turned to leave. Justice didn't bring Reed back, but it gave Willa her name back, her strength, and maybe even her peace. The headlines faded faster than expected. News cycles moved on. Another scandal, another leak, another distraction. But for Willa, the fallout wasn't about the media. It was about the people, the ones left behind. She walked through Reed's old neighborhood for the first time in months. It looked the same: kids on bikes, sprinklers clicking in the lawns, American flags still waving in front yards. But it felt different. People stared, whispered. Some nodded with respect. Others looked away. To them, Reed had been a hero. To some, Willow was now the vigilante sister who couldn't leave well enough alone. She stopped in front of his house, Marla's house, once. Now empty. Bank-owned. She stood at the steps, hand resting on the chipped railing. This was where it started. And now it was just wood and brick and memory. "You did good, Reed," she whispered. "But I did what you couldn't." Because he had honor, loyalty, boundaries. Willa had none of those left. And maybe that's why she survived. Willa had started hearing things. Not voices. Just moments. A bootstep behind her in a quiet parking lot. A whisper in a dead motel hallway. Her name, spoken low, when no one was there. Echoes. Of Reed. Of the war she'd just ended. She didn't tell Gwen. Or Cal. She didn't want to answer questions. She didn't want anyone to tell her it was trauma, or PTSD, or survivor's guilt. Because deep down, she didn't want the echoes to stop. Sometimes she'd wake up at night, sweating, eyes locked on the door, waiting. Not for someone to come after her, but for him. And in that haze between sleep and memory, she swore she'd see Reed. Not broken, not betrayed. Just there, looking at her. Proud, quiet, then gone again. She never cried when the war ended, but she cried now. Because when the noise stops, all that's left is the echo of who you used to be. She kept one photo on her dresser. Just one. No medals. No news articles. No digital drives or printed transcripts. Just a single picture. Reed, arms around her, both laughing. Sunlight in their faces. A moment from a decade ago, Before Marla, before war, before secrets, before death. She didn't look at it every day. That wasn't the point. She just needed to know it was there. A reminder that revenge doesn't erase love. It just clears the way to feel it again. Willa sat on her porch that morning, sipping coffee, watching the world exist without her needing to fight it. Birds chirped. Wind moved the leaves. Her phone didn't ring. For the first time, she felt the weight lift. Not all the way, but enough. Reed's voice echoed in her mind from one of his last videos. You were always the strong one, Will. And maybe now, she finally believed that. Chapter 40. Closure. The town finally forgot her name. Or maybe they just got tired of whispering it. Either way, Willa liked it that way. She lived quieter now. Rented a small house on the edge of town, 2 bedrooms, one she never opened. Not yet. Not ready. The war was over, but peace had its own challenges. Quiet wasn't silence. And closure wasn't comfort. She still woke up early. Still checked windows and doors like instinct. Still carried a pistol even when she went to get coffee. Old habits didn't die. They just faded. Sometimes she saw herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not the soldier. Not the sister. Not the weapon. Just Willa. One afternoon, Gwen came by. Dropped off a letter. No return address, she said. You might want to read it alone. Willa did. Inside, a handwritten note. Marla. Just a few lines. I ran. I'm still running. Maybe I always will be. But I see your face every night. I see his too. I hope one day you find peace. I know I won't. No apology. No excuses. But somehow that made it more honest. Willa folded the note. Didn't cry. Didn't burn it either. Some things didn't need closure. Just distance. The article dropped on a Thursday. Front page. National circulation. Written by a reporter Gwen trusted. The headline was sharp, bold. The seal, the senator, and the sister who brought it all down. Willa didn't promote it. Didn't even read it for the first 2 days. When she did, she sat on her porch, dog curled at her feet, coffee in hand, and read every word. Reed's story. The truth. From deployment to betrayal. His warnings. His instincts. His death. And Willa's part in unraveling it. It wasn't perfect. Some details were off. Some quotes edited for drama. But the heart was there. People would finally know what happened. And not from a whisper or a thread online. From truth. Printed in black and white. That night, a neighbor knocked. You're Willa, right? He asked, nervously holding the paper. She nodded. My son's in the Marines, he said. I read this, and I just want to say thank you. She didn't say much back. Just smiled. Nodded. Because there's a kind of truth that doesn't need explaining. And this time, someone else was carrying it. Willa sat in front of the VA memorial wall, tracing the engraved names with her finger. She found his. Mallory. Reed A. No rank listed. No cause of death. Just a name. But that was enough. For years, he was just another folded flag. Another ceremony. Another number. No? He was the reason people were asking questions. He was the man who cracked the silence. And Willa? She was the one who screamed loud enough for it to be heard. She pulled a sharper from her jacket, uncapped it, and wrote a single word beneath his name in the stone's groove. Fighter. She knew someone would wash it off eventually. But for today, for this moment, it mattered. His name wasn't just carved in stone. It was carved in her. In every scar she wore. Every fight she took. Every secret she broke wide open. People asked her sometimes, why not walk away? Why not let it go? She never had an answer. But now, looking at his name, she finally understood. She didn't fight to remember him. She fought so the world wouldn't forget. The first morning Willa didn't wake up with her heart racing. It almost scared her. She laid in bed for a full 5 minutes, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the dread to kick in, the old reflex to grab a weapon, check the window, scan the door. But it didn't come. Just sunlight. Warm. Simple. Still. She sat up slowly, walked barefoot to the kitchen, brewed coffee without a pistol tucked in her waistband for the first time in years. Peace wasn't something she trusted yet. It felt too soft, too quiet. But maybe that was okay. The world hadn't stopped spinning just because her war was over. There were still people like Gentry out there. Still men in suits making decisions that killed good soldiers in silence. But that wasn't her battle anymore. She'd fought hers. And she'd won. The news barely mentioned the scandal now. A few trials still lingered, appeals being filed, money still moving in secret corridors. But the names behind it were no longer invisible. And Reed? He had a legacy now. The truth of who he was and what he uncovered couldn't be buried again. Willa stepped outside into the sun, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "You can rest now." She wasn't just saying it to him. She was saying it to herself. Marla sat in a prison cell 3 states away. No one visited. No one called. Her trial was over. She'd taken a plea, obstruction, conspiracy, falsifying evidence. She thought she'd walk away with a slap on the wrist. But the world had changed. Public pressure made examples out of people like her. So now? She was just another number in a system she never thought she'd see from the inside. Gone were the designer clothes, the wine-soaked brunches, the carefully curated life she built on lies. Now it was cement, and silence, and shame. She didn't speak to the other inmates. She barely spoke at all. Some days she didn't eat. Some nights she couldn't sleep. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Reed. Not in anger, in disappointment. She remembered his eyes more than anything, how they used to soften when he looked at her, and how cold they'd been the last week before his death, as if he'd finally seen her clearly. She'd told herself 100 times she didn't kill him, but that didn't matter. She'd helped it happen. And now, her name was gone from every guest list, every friend's phone, every part of the world that once knew her. She was still alive, but everything she'd built? Gone. And the woman she used to be? She wasn't coming back. Willa stood at the edge of the cliff where Reed used to run drills back in high school. It overlooked the river valley, wide, open, peaceful now. She held his dog tags in her hand. Not the ones the military returned to her, clean and polished in a velvet box. These were his real ones, scratched, sweat-worn, one edge dented from a mission she never asked about. She never needed to, because she knew the man who wore them. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't always kind. But he was loyal, and he died trying to do the right thing. Willa sat on a rock nearby and pulled out her notebook, the one she used when she first started tracing the lies. It was battered now, torn edges, pages full of names, passwords, moments that nearly broke her. She turned to the last page and wrote 3 words. He didn't quit. Then she closed it. She tied the dog tags to a pine branch Reed had once carved his initials into as a kid, placed it at the cliff's edge, and stood in silence. No prayers. No speeches. Just breath. Wind. Memory. Willa didn't need to fight anymore. And Reed? He wasn't just a soldier buried in a box. He was a spark that lit a fire big enough to burn a system. She turned and walked away, boots crunching against gravel, the river behind her, her brother's name echoing forward. Not as a warning, but as a promise. Reed Mallory didn't die for nothing. And neither did the truth. This was more than a story. If Reed's fight pulled you in, if Willa's war for truth made you feel something, do one thing to keep their story alive. Like this video. Share it with someone who believes truth matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Because we tell stories that hit harder than headlines. Now, before you scroll, I want to hear your voice in this. If you were in Willa's shoes, would you have gone public or disappeared for good? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And until the next story, stay sharp, stay human, and